The BYU Cougars slid in the CFP rankings as we expected after BYU's loss to Texas Tech, but where they are placed still means they have everything to play for.
You are Locked On Cougars, your daily podcast on the BYU Cougars, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, everybody? Welcome into Locked On Cougars, your daily podcast focused on the BYU Cougars, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, which is now America's #1 sports podcast network. I'm Jake Hatch, executive producer of the KSL Sports Zone in Salt Lake City, Utah, and a 14-year credentialed media member at BYU. I am your resident expert and insider, your host here on this podcast. And as always, thank you for making Locked On Cougars your first listen of the day. All right, coming up on today's show, we're going to talk about where BYU is ranked in the CFP rankings at number 12 and why it's actually a great spot for BYU to be in, all things considered. We'll delve into that. Then we're going to talk about BYU basketball. Were they recipients of a look-ahead letdown? We'll talk about that, and then we'll also talk about BYU's newest pickup in basketball. That would be Abdullah Ahmed. What does he bring to BYU, and what can he do for the men's basketball program? I think a whole lot, and we'll get to all of it ahead on today's podcast. But if you missed it last night, the CFP rankings version 2 came out, and BYU slid 5 spots from number 7 to number 12. And as I mentioned on yesterday's podcast, I posited that I believe the BYU would slide to 11. That's where I kind of staked my claim on where BYU would slide. 12, I said, was the backstop, it felt like, for BYU, at least from my vantage point, considering BYU holds head-to-head win over the 13th-ranked Utah Utes, and also they only have 1 loss as compared to 2 losses for Utah. I think this is a great spot for BYU to be in because the Cougars now, if they win out here from here on out, 3-1, with the games that are also still on the docket, including 2 high-profile SEC games coming up this weekend in particular, with Georgia and Alabama facing off against both Oklahoma and Texas. All 4 of those teams, by the way, ranked in front of BYU. The results of that are obviously going to force action with regards to the top 12 of the college football playoff rankings. So the big message, as I have been talking about, it feels like for days, if not weeks now, for BYU, it's not weeks, but it's days now since their loss to Texas Tech, is the whole message that BYU needs to focus on is TCU. Win that game, then beat Cincinnati, and then beat UCF. So long as the Cougars handle their business, and what handling their business entails is winning football games down the stretch here, BYU is going to go into the conference championship game weekend, the early part of December. And if they are 11-1, I would be hard pressed to have the College Football Playoff Committee deny BYU at least an at-large bid into the college football playoff. The other thing, and some of you have asked me about this, I got 2 emails on it yesterday, and let me acknowledge this real quick, is that some of you have asked, well, Jake, what if they make a run to the the Big 12 championship game and get a rematch against Texas Tech and suffer essentially the same type of loss that they suffered this past weekend? How would that affect things? Could BYU be cast out of the college football playoff at that point? History with the College Football Playoff Committee, as short as it is with this 12-team playoff, because it's only been a few years now, is that they actually will penalize you less for conference championship games than any other game on your schedule. The only exceptions are if you lose your quarterback in the case of Florida State a few years back, or if you have a situation with your team that they just don't look the part, because the committee does take the eyeball test into account when it comes to these college football playoff rankings. So yes, BYU in theory could win out here, go 11-1, find themselves easily inside the top 10 of the college football playoff rankings, look like they're a lock for an at-large bid, get pummeled once again in Arlington, Texas, have Cougar fans feeling a little bit grumpy about that, obviously, but still find themselves still in the top 10 when those final playoff rankings come out this Sunday after those conference championship games. So the whole thing, and I'll reiterate it here once again for those of you who missed it early on today's podcast, is BYU has to focus on the TCU Horned Frogs. It's easy for them to look back at TCU and say, man, what could have been? It's easy for them to look ahead to a big showdown against, once again, ranked Cincinnati. I think they're 25th, if I recall correctly, in this college football playoff rankings that came out yesterday. They can be easy to look ahead to that. But all they need to do, quite honestly, is look at TCU and understand that TCU, among other programs out there in the Big 12, there's one that's ranked one spot behind BYU, who would love nothing more than for the TCU Horned Frogs to come to Provo, Utah for the first time since 2009. It's been that long since the Horned Frogs have played in Provo, beat BYU, and essentially throw the Cougars onto the who could have been college football playoff hopeful type teams. That sounded way too complicated, but you get the point of what I'm trying to say there. This is a message for BYU. It's a shot across their bow because they slid to 12. That obviously was a decent slide, but it also showed that the playoff committee, they do value your head-to-head results. In the case BYU having the win over Utah, no matter what Utah fans may be saying out there, well, they would have won if they played again. Guess what? You played the game when you played it, and BYU won. So you look at it from that prism. The playoff committee had a backstop for BYU at 12, it felt like, and that's exactly where they're slotted. Now, BYU is essentially one place out of an at-large bid right now, and that's with their first loss. If you make the run here, and with the other programs that'll maneuver ahead of you, whether it's wins or losses, especially the likes of with the SEC this weekend, because like I said, you have got 4 and 5 ranked teams, speaking of Alabama and Georgia, 4 and 5, against the number 10 and 11 teams. Guess what? You win this weekend against TCU, it's very easy that you pop right back up to 11, maybe 10, and you're right back in business. That is the good news if you're a Cougar fan, because nothing, and Aaron Roderick said it yesterday. Bear Bachmeyer's also talked about it, and many other members of the BYU football program. I think they have been spreading this across this locker room, is that none of their stated goals, and those include making the Big 12 championship game, potentially winning said game, and also playing in the college football playoff, having a legitimate chance to win a national championship for the first time since BYU won it in 1984, every single one of those goals is still right there on the table for BYU, even though they got beat pretty soundly by the Texas Tech Red Raiders. It's a great spot for BYU to be in, all things considered. And the nice part is, yeah, you cashed in your mulligan now. Now focus on TCU, beat Josh Hoover and the Horned Frogs, and find yourself vaulting right back up into at-large consideration, and find yourself very much in the mix to play in the biggest games, or game in some cases, that BYU will have played in quite literally decades. All right, coming up next, we are going to talk about BYU basketball. They faced off against the Delaware Blue Hens last night, and started in pretty auspicious fashion, and we'll talk about what BYU needs to take away from this as now they look ahead to a fellow top 10 team in the UConn Huskies. We'll get into that next right here on Locked On Cougars. Today's show is brought to you by our friends over at Supply House. When the opening whistle blows on a new repair, get your crew moving forward with Supply House. Order today and see parts on your doorstep tomorrow. Over 280,000 plumbing, HVAC, and electrical items from the most trusted brands in the business. The real-time inventory and honest lead times keep you from punting on projects, while their industry-leading customer service always has your blind side covered. That's the best part about this. If you need parts for a project, they have next day delivery, Talk about a game changer. As any of you who know who work in the trades business, that's an incredible thing. The part finder tools and 3D schematics also save you hours on the jobs, where every detail matters along the way. So join the free Trademaster program from our friends at Supply House today and score serious perks like priority shipping, lower prices, and a dedicated support line. Visit supplyhouse.com, sign up for free, and use the promo code SHCollege5 for 5% off your first order. That's supplyhouse.com. Real people and real service. Thank you once again for making Locked On Cougars your first listen of the day. And thank you once again for making the Locked On Podcast Network America's #1 sports podcast network. It's a nice thing to have. We're doing a great thing with what we've got going on with Locked On, and thank you for all of your support. Please continue to subscribe, rate, and review, share with your family and friends. If you're watching this on YouTube right now, go and click that thumbs up icon. It's simple as that. You like that show, it helps the algorithm, share with other Cougar fans, helps us continue to build this audience. Also want to give a shout out, and this is not a comprehensive list of all of you who said hi to me last night. These are the names that I wrote down, and I didn't write down all of them, so apologies if I missed it. But I met Jeff and Rex last night. Colby, obviously, my longtime buddy who sits right up above us on Media Row, said hi to him. Colby is a great Cougar fan. Met Patrick, Ben, Stanley. Thank you to all of you who said hi last night on the concourse at the Marriott Center. It's always good to be out among the people because I sit in a studio a lot of times and talking to a camera. And as one fellow member of the media told me last night, Jake, it feels like I talk to you a whole lot more than I actually do because you kind of talk at me via screen and I talk right back, but there's no actual interaction back and forth. So fun stuff. But as always, thank you for your support of this venture. It's absolutely awesome to do what I do. All right. Let's talk about BYU basketball. Now, they won the game last night. That's the good news. They're still perfect on the season, 3-0, but 85-68 is nowhere near what the odds makers had in the case of BYU facing off against the Delaware Blue Hens. The 7th-ranked Cougars were somewhere between a 34.5 and 35.5 point favorite at most of the sports books out there, including our friends over at FanDuel. So BYU is expected to race away from the Blue Hens and absolutely trounced them, much like they did on Saturday night to Holy Cross. Well, it did not start that way because if you missed it, the Delaware Blue Hens started with a 10-0 run to start the game before Rob Wright scored the first bucket for BYU almost 2 minutes into this game. And the entire rest of the first half for BYU in this contest was a slog. Every time BYU tried to make a push in that first half, the Blue Hens answered with a big three, a big bucket. Just they had every answer for BYU in that. The nice part was you saw the Cougars punch back and find themselves down by 3 going into halftime. That obviously you would have liked to see them take the lead at halftime, but they came out of the locker room and you could tell there was renewed emphasis to say, yeah, okay, this is over. And Delaware, they swung. Speaking of the punches that they threw at BYU, and I got to give mad credit to Bliss, their star guard. He had 18 points in this game. Also, Emery, their big man, he had 18 and 7 in terms of his output. And I mentioned it yesterday on the podcast. For those of you who are everydayers, he averaged 12 and 12 going into this game. And BYU, to their credit, battled back. And I don't want to take a major victory lap, but any of you who are everydayers, remember I talked yesterday about what I wanted to see from BYU basketball in this game, and there were 2 things in particular. Number 1, get your 3-point shooting in order. That was the number 1 thing. And the number 2 thing was offensive rebounds. Well, what are the 2 things that Kevin Young talked about post-game that he had his team focus in on this game? 3-point shooting and offensive rebounding. In fact, he told us actually a really funny story. He said that they earlier this week in practice, I think it was probably Monday, I guess, because the only day of practice they had, they ended practice as soon as Rob Wright got an offensive rebound. I said, we're done. Call it. We're done. Stop the count. So they had an emphasis on this. And to their credit, if you look at BYU stats, they made absolutely sure that they were not going to lose the rebounding battle because they had 19 offensive rebounds, 27 defensive rebounds, and absolutely owned the glass in this game. And that was a big reason why the Cougars made a strong push in the second half and rolled to their victory, combined with the other key to the game that I talked about is getting a 3-point shooting in order. Now, BYU for the game shot 37.5% from the 3-point stripe, 12 of 32, but they started, I think it was 0 of 12 in this game. I was like, okay, more of the same here for BYU. But in the second half alone, 11 of 20, 55% from 3, led by Rob Wright, who made 3 of his own, and also Richie Saunders, 6 of 8. As those 2 guys ended up being BYU's leading scorers, Richie ended up with 26. Rob Wright had a career-high 26 points and nearly came up with a triple-double, and it's not for lack of effort. If any of you watched that game, in the final stanza, he was doing everything he could to get another assist and another rebound because he had 26, 9, and 9, and was oh so close and had a pretty funny moment in the postgame. I asked him, hey, did you know how close you were to the triple-double? And he was going to almost like play like he didn't know, and Richie Saunders says, don't act like you didn't. So it was kind of funny to see that all play out. But hey, when I know something or I observe something, I'm going to share it with you guys. And I always appreciate, and I'm not always going to be this, Nostradamus-like. But I told you guys, 3-point shooting, offensive rebounding, BYU needed to clean those things up, and that's exactly what they did. So credit to them for handling their business. And the nice part is they didn't suffer the worst fate that you can do in terms of a bye game like this, and that's lose to a team you're paying to play in your arena. So really good to see that. BYU almost a 21 rebound plus 21 rebound advantage in this game. A lot of it good signs for the BYU basketball program because they've been out rebounded by 5 offensive rebounds on average for the first 2 games. Well, it was at 19-7, a plus 12 advantage in this game for BYU. So they handle their business. And I also acknowledge that slow start for BYU in the first half, you can chalk it up. I would say this right now. If you were to give truth serum to anybody in that locker room, including Kevin Young, it was a look ahead letdown. Letdown, look ahead. It's a thing from the Solid Verbal podcast that I listen to often. And what it means is BYU has a big game against UConn on Saturday. There's no just denying it. They're playing at TD Garden. A guy like AJ DeBonsa is going home from Brockton, Massachusetts, which is a suburb of Boston, as I understand it. He's going home to play in front of his family and friends, and it's obviously a huge, huge game. The UConn Huskies are number 3 in the country, and this is a top 10 showdown, and it's going to hopefully deliver some fireworks. So I absolutely subscribe to the theory that BYU was looking ahead to UConn and said, okay, this Delaware team's no good. They were in the 250 range on KenPom.com. So it's very easy to say, yeah, we'll just get past this. Hey, guys, we're playing UConn on Saturday. That's exactly what that first half screamed to me, is they had their eye off the ball, to use that expression, and they went out there, and Delaware, to their credit, made BYU pay. And it's something that Kevin Young will utilize. He's got the full attention of his guys now saying, hey, y'all thought you were slick. Y'all thought you could look past the Delaware Blue Hens here, and they nearly made you pay for it. Now, I accept the fact that BYU had a strong second half, outscoring them by 20 down the stretch. I get all that. But those are the wake-up calls that Kevin Young will enjoy, because he will be able to point to that and say, guys, you took your eye off of our opponent. You said that, hey, Delaware doesn't matter. And they came out and threw some haymakers at you guys, and you had to scramble to get back in to that game. You cannot look ahead to other games when it comes to handling your business. This is a BYU basketball team who has major, major goals. They want to play in a Final Four. They want to contend for a national championship. That stuff is there for them, but they cannot overlook the small stuff, and that includes teams the caliber of Delaware, even though you have the UConns of the world out there looming on deck. We'll talk about UConn as the week progresses, because it's a huge showdown, and I'm looking forward to it. But I thought it was a solid victory for BYU, and I guess the one thing I want to see moving forward from the Cougars is you had your big three deliver, 70 points. Speaking of AJ Richie and Rob Wright. So you had them score 70 of BYU's points in 85. It's only 15 points come from the rest of the roster. You need to see more output from other guys on this roster, especially from the bench. If I recall correctly, just 4 bench points for BYU. So that's one thing that I guess is kind of the next thing on the checklist of, hey, need to see that improve. But I'm sure with time, and as this team kind of gets settled and working together, that should come along the path. All right. But BYU, I think also with regards to the rebounding issues that they've had early this season, I think that they learned that, you know what, you can never have too many big bodies in the middle of your front court. And they added another big body to BYU's roster yesterday in Abdullah Ahmed. What does he offer to BYU basketball? We'll get into that next, coming up on Locked On Cougars. Today's show is brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. The NBA is back, and there's no better place to get in on the action than with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Even if it's the start of a game or want to ride the hot hand, FanDuel has live bets on everything from who will score next to fourth quarter comebacks and literally everything in between. The best part is, plus, you can even combine your live bets into a same-game parlay for a shot at a bigger payout. That's all courtesy of your friends over at FanDuel. It keeps every game exciting, especially when your team is making that late push and trying to get the victory that you're obviously rooting for along the way. Right now, FanDuel is offering new customers $300 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. Head to FanDuel.com to sign up today and play your game with FanDuel, as they are the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Thank you once again for making Locked On Cougars your first listen of the day. I want to remind you guys to sign up for the Locked On Cougars Insider Group. Get the inside scoop on all things BYU sports I've got for you guys every single day. I got some new perks that'll be rolling out in the near future as well. So if you want to get in on the action, you get a 14-day free trial to join if you join today. And also, just $5 a month to be a part of the Insider Group. And it comes to your phone in the form of a text message. I don't know how much more direct you can get in terms of inside intel that you as a Cougar fan would crave. So join today, the Locked On Cougars Insider Group. I'd love to have you guys along for the ride. All right. So BYU garnered a commitment from Abdullah Ahmed yesterday, and this is a big recruiting win for BYU, especially considering who BYU beat out for his commitment, namely the Houston Cougars, the number one team in the land. Now, they have been BYU's Achilles heel so far in their Big 12 tenure because the Cougars have never beaten the other Cougars in basketball as members of the Big 12 Conference. And in fact, very few teams have, because the Houston Cougars are an absolutely elite basketball program, but it always feels good to pull one over on the Red Cougars and get a recruiting win of this manner. Now, the Abdullah Ahmed situation, for those of you who are unaware, he is coming over from the NBA's G League, which is their minor league affiliates. Now, there was some controversy stirred with G League players now being able to play college basketball, but much like guys like Robbie McCombs, my issue is that why people are freaking out about this. And some like national media folks, I think Jeff Goodman said, whoa, oh, brother, or something like that. And to Robbie's credit, and I would have said the same thing, why are we upset about G League players being able to play collegiate basketball, but not upset about European players, guys like Jaeger Dielman, Mihailo Boskovic, Alexei Kostic from BYU, obviously, who have come over from Europe and have played in professional basketball leagues there, or academies that obviously are taking care of them? Why is a G League guy who has never attended college before treated any different? It's professional basketball. They have not been making the money that the NCAA considers to be apparently beyond what NIL and the like would affect, because in this day and age, you can pay players. That's just part of life now. I don't get what the scuttlebutt is in terms of being upset about G League players joining college rosters versus European players coming over. It's the exact same scenario, and BYU is a beneficiary of it. And Abdullah Ahmed is going to be a very, very nice addition to this BYU roster, because I think we have seen that Keba Keita needs help rebounding the basketball. And that's a credit to BYU, by the way. Last night, guys like Robert Wright III had 5 offensive rebounds. That's going to work on the glass for BYU's smallest guy on the roster in Rob Wright. That's good to see. AJ DeBonsa, Richie Saunders, and when Kennard Davis Jr., who Kevin Young said he's going to be fine moving forward, who sat out last night, is back in the lineup, those guys need to make a concerted effort to help Keba Keita rebound the basketball. I think that one thing that Kevin Young has realized maybe early on this season, at least from my vantage point, is you can never have too much depth in the front court. And it's, in fact, I'm concerned about the overall depth BYU has in the front court right now. Is Hadim Mboop, is he capable of being that guy, the backup 5 for BYU? Is Xavier Staten going to finally figure things out and be able to be a serviceable big as a freshman? That remains a question to be answered, but they are going to lose Keba Keita after the season, and that's where Abdullah Ahmed steps in, because some of you, when I talked about his recruiting visit, his official visit this past weekend, said, well, what about Xavier Staten? Couldn't he be the starting center for BYU next year? Yes, he very well could be, but I also think that BYU is looking at it from the vantage point of, hey, we need as much talent as we possibly can get, and if this guy wants to play for us, we'll add him, and may the best man win. I still think that Xavier Staten is skinny. He's just, and it's nothing. He's tall. He's a legit 7-footer. There's no doubt about that. But it feels like his frame, he needs to pack on pounds, pack on strength. And that's what Abdullah Ahmed already has in spades. He's listed at 6'10". If you take off his shoes, apparently he's 6'8". But if you look at his skill set and some of the highlights I've seen, as sparse as they are from the G League, this looks like almost like a like-for-like replacement for a guy like Keba Keita. He's not going to demand high usage. He's also going to come in and be a nice rebounding / defensive big that is very capable in pick and roll sets of being a vertical lob threat, which is exactly what Kevin Young wants in this offense for BYU. He wants guys who put pressure on the rim and also defend it with their life, to use that expression. And I understand that Keba Keita is an absolute freak athlete. He jumps 40 some odd inches in the air. That's probably not the same level that Abdullah Ahmed has, but Abdullah Ahmed has gotten professional experience already playing for the Westchester Knicks of the G League. And he understands, I think, his role at the professional level and will accept whatever it comes to when it comes to coming to BYU. Now, there was some question in the lead up to his official visit of when he ultimately could enroll at BYU, but it was pointed out to me, but it was also pointed out, it was pointed out to me that Robbie McCombs pointed out, there you go, and I got the transitive property there, that with Nate Pickens' season-ending surgery, BYU essentially has put, I guess you'd call Nate Pickens on injured reserve, thereby opening up a roster slot to add Abdullah Ahmed at mid-year, much like they are doing with guard KJ Perry. So The expectation is that both Ahmed and Perry will redshirt after enrolling in January at BYU. And then by next spring, they should already have ingratiated themselves with their teammates and practices and the like and hit the ground running ahead of next season while they kind of form a nucleus or a core of what next year's squad in 26-27 would have for it. I like this pickup. I think that Abdullah Ahmed is exactly what the doctor ordered. As I said, you can never have too much talent. And when you beat the likes of a Houston Cougars team, who we all know how talented the Houston Cougars have been and how athletic a roster they typically put out there, if they wanted this guy, yeah, BYU absolutely wants him as well. And the Cougars, to their credit, once again get it done. And that shows the recruiting chops that Kevin Young has. And I'm not obtuse to acknowledge that NIL plays a role, the overall role of coaches and having guys envision what they can do at BYU. All of that plays into this situation. But the good news is the Cougars have proven once again that they are a force on a national level when it comes to recruiting. And that's great news because coming up later this week, Austin Gooseby, who's a prep player from Texas, is going to be picking among 4 teams, one of them being BYU, the other being Texas, where his older brother is, funny enough, an offensive lineman, is playing football for the Texas Longhorns. And could the good vibes from Abdullah Ahmed's commitment roll into Austin Gooseby picking BYU? That would be awesome. It would cap off a really, really elite week on the recruiting front for BYU, whereas Ahmed is technically a member of the 2026 class. A guy like Gooseby is a 2027 class member, but they both, in theory, would be playing with one another on this roster going forward and forming just an incredibly, incredibly talented roster for the BYU basketball program. I love what Kevin Young is doing. He has made BYU an absolute destination, and he has used the phrase, he said, I went on the rant last year, it's not a hypothetical. He wants BYU to be an NBA factory. And if a guy like Abdullah Ahmed, who's already played at the G League level, knows probably what it takes to kind of take that next step and go from the NBA's minor league system to playing legit NBA minutes, well, he sees BYU as an avenue to doing just that. If Austin Gooseby picks BYU, he sees that avenue. What we saw from AJ DeBonsa as well as Richie Saunders and Rob Wright, all 3 of those guys look like they're going to be future NBA players at some point in the relatively near future. I think next year in particular, very clearly, it's going to be AJ DeBonsa and Richie Saunders. Who knows what Rob Wright's future holds? So the nice part is you're watching an actual recruiting force come into effect for BYU, and it should be absolutely celebrated if you're a Cougar fan. It is incredible to consider where BYU was at just 2 years ago when you have Mark Pope, who done a really good job at BYU and a surprising finish in his first Big 12 season, and then he opts to bolt for Kentucky. It felt like BYU is set to take a major, major step back. Well, they hire Kevin Young, and all they've done is take leaps and bounds and major strides forward to make themselves into one of the premier programs in the entire country. It is absolutely remarkable. It's absolutely praiseworthy, and it's cool to watch what's happening in Provo, the hashtag they're using out there, guys, when it comes to talking about BYU recruiting. It's awesome. So celebrate Abdullah Ahmed's commitment. And once again, it shows what Kevin Young and company, the business they mean serious business. They want to win and win it at an elite level at BYU. And having guys like this coming into this program signal that they're going to continue to have a strong roster for the foreseeable future. All right, that's going to do it for this Wednesday edition of the show. It feels like the week is both slowly and quickly flying by, but it's been a fun week already. And as always, thank you for your support of the podcast. Coming up tomorrow, it's Crossover Thursday. We're talking with Darian Gray of Locked On TCU to get you an inside look at what to expect from the TCU Horned Frogs in their matchup against the BYU Cougars. So stay tuned for that. And as always, thank you for making Locked On Cougars your first listen today. Go make your second listen. Our friends over the Locked On Big 12 podcast. You guys know him, Drake Toll, does a great job covering all things Big 12. And as always, come back tomorrow and be an everydayer right here on the Locked On Cougars podcast.